Next speaker, Professor Rick Snell, Associate Professor in Law, University of Tasmania, Australia, and a great friend of OP Jindal Global.
Okay, thank you very much. This is, I think, my fourth or fifth visit to Jindal in the last 2 to 3 years. Every time I come here, there's either a new building, a new program, a new faculty, or new something else. So this is an exciting place to be. I want to address my presentation today about managing that interface between the academy and research and industry, looking at it from the perspective of the law and the legal academy in particular as a subset within social sciences and humanities. So almost a kind of representation of what Jindal is all about. It lacks that kind of science to it focuses much more on humanities, social sciences and law. And I think there's a very problematic relationship, especially for the legal academy, and talking about research and talking about working with industry, etc. And I want to address some of those implications and link that back to some of the points that have been made by previous speakers about the problems about funding, because I think it's compounded within that kind of legal environment or from a legal perspective. The first thing I'd like to say is that basically when you look at this topic in comparison to the areas like science, medicine, health, industrial research, etc., law plays a very little part. You can travel to most law schools and you'll find very little expertise in those key areas. The approach by law research, and even just going for competitive funding, again, it varies from university to university, but in most law schools, if you get a success rate or an activity rate of greater than 20% of your staff being involved in getting competitive research grants, whether from government or from industry, that's an exceptionally performing law school, especially in an Australian context. And that the success rate of law grants from things like the Australian Research Council in Australia is again less than probably about 15% and possibly even less than that in terms of the research grant applications. So most law academics left by themselves drift away fairly quickly from competing for research and therefore getting involved in that interface between research and academic management, or the interface between those. And it's also compounded by a culture. Most law schools traditionally and most legal academics have been lone wolf researchers. They do it themselves. Their heroes are judges. Judges sit and decide by themselves, independent of each other. Argue before me, present your advocacy, I will judge it, I will effectively argue back as a legal advocate. You very rarely see in courtroom performances tag teamed by groups of lawyers who effectively switch their roles between each other, acting in collaboration. It's effectively the lone defender against the crowd that takes place there. The core expertise in subject matters, again, tends to be focused on criminal law, environmental law, or even international law, but core legal subjects. It's not about and it's all about kind of recounting what the law is and current knowledge rather than future knowledge. So researchers are out there looking for future knowledge, creating new knowledge that takes place. But the legal academy largely is retrospective. They look about what the law is and what the law largely has been. And the law tends not to encourage innovation and experiment, especially if it may lead to failure. So while you may have law reform, which encourages new developments, most of us involved in law reform spend endless hours convincing governments and the legal fraternity and others that what we're doing is safe, proven, tried and tested, even if it's in another jurisdiction. It's a very difficult measure to come up and say, this has never been tried before, we're just going with a wild idea and it may or may not work. The test tube may produce penicillin or it may not. We just want to give it a go because we just want to change things. That's not the normal operating environment in which the law takes place. But that's basically changing, and it's changing relatively quickly, but I think Law and Legal Academy has a lot to offer for that management, that research, innovation interface that takes place. First, it's a major opportunity to address what Professor Michael talked about, strategic adjacency. Involving lawyers and legal expertise in research projects gives you strategic adjacency because there's very often very little in the law field to match what's been taking place. So whether you're talking about chemistry, you're talking about genetics, medicine, pharmacy, criminology, the Legal Academy brings a lot of new interesting perspectives to those particular research projects. We'll talk just quickly about one that my university law school is involved with. A bunch of chemists got really excited about investigating and analysing wastewater. What's the components within that wastewater? How can it be measured? The technical difficulties of trying to get different streams of wastewater from different pipelines, the different ingredients that take place, the fact it varies during night time, say with nightclubs in a district, a lot more drugs come into the system or the water system during that particular period compared to the middle of the day. Different suburbs have different wastewater components, etc. How do you measure it? How do you test it? So the scientists came up with a simple solution. You go to prisons. Closed environment, known pipelines, you can effectively segment off different areas of the prison, give different flows, and then you can tell what drugs have been or not been used at a particular time. Have strip searches in one area of the prison work more effectively than sniffer dogs in another, or abstinence or education programs, etc. So that was fantastic. But they brought some of our legal academics into the mix. And what the legal academics effectively did was say, what does this mean for prison policy? What does this mean for policing policy of suburbs or different areas? In addition, the other thing that the lawyers brought into that particular process was their writing and communication skills. The science suddenly loved having legal academics on the team because they could hand over the writing and the presentation and the advocacy of those projects to the grant funders and others, and achieve a major success from that particular process. The other thing that where lawyers or legal academics can contribute enormously, especially in the areas of health, medicine, pharmacology and other areas, is navigating the regulatory environment in terms of data protection, privacy protection, etc., and the actual rules and regulations over the research project. Many research projects fail at those particular hurdles because they don't understand or can't interpret the regulatory environment or the regulatory requirements. That's, if you like, the bread and butter of a legal academic's perspective on being involved in those particular processes. The other thing that lawyers then are good for, the Legal Academy is good for in terms of managing that research-innovation interface, is that researchers tend to be very bad at understanding budget cycles, especially of governments as a major research funders. They tend to wait until the government announces research grants, such as from the Australian Research Council, saying we've got X million of dollars, that will be available, put in your applications in the next 6 months, we'll determine it from that particular time. But when they come up with a bright idea, such as with wastewater, and they try to get some government funding and saying, why wouldn't the prisons or why wouldn't the police be interested in giving us a bucket load of money to be able to carry out this research? They get lots of positive receptions from the government bureaucracy at the time, but their pleas for money always seem to fall on deaf ears. The reason for that is that most government departments and bureaucracies are effectively budgeting on a 12, 18 or 20-month period. So until you pitch the idea prior to the budget process in which you're attempting to get the money, it's just not going to work, and you're not going to receive those particular outcomes. Again, lawyers and legal academics are generally very good at doing that and can allow the key researchers to be able to focus on their major activity. The other major thing I think that lawyers and the Legal Academy can do for managing that interface between innovation and research, etc., is the actual presentation and communication. What I see all the time are people with great ideas who fail to present them, who fail to convince the government or the private benefactors so that they ought to fund this particular idea. So that story we got today from Jindal, from Professor Kurma about how this institution was funded was a story about pitch, it was a story about communication, it was a story about advocacy, and it's a story about going back and back and back, but not with the same tired old tune, but actually listening to the people that you're dealing with and altering your ideas and your proposals to achieve those particular types of outcomes. Lawyers and legal academics are good at advocacy. A campaign to effectively convince an organisation that, say, wastewater research in prisons may be technically difficult, may be difficult in terms of privacy, may be extremely difficult in public relations. And there's one thing that government departments hate, is negative publicity, i.e. to get the publicity that the research reveals that your prison is full of drugs, and drugs that they weren't meant to be able to get into prison, is not necessarily a great research outcome and certainly not a great PR outcome for a government department. But being able to convince them that you can manage that type of release of information, convince the journalists how to present that information, allows you to then put that program into operation. So what I wanted to pitch there is that you've got some unique problems that were outlined by previous speakers, where you had Professor Miller talk about all the hurdles, talking about the fact that there's small amounts of government funding that's available, all the difficulties, our friends from Vietnam pointing out the major gaps that take place, etc. And you've got some of your keenest researchers and some of your best communicators who are almost isolated from the whole process, because the natural tendency is to withdraw themselves from the research field rather than become involved. Because when they read the requests for research proposals, whether from industry or from government, very rarely will a lawyer say, I can see the research project that I can become involved with. But their technical skills and their professional skills are those that are ones that are necessarily required. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Hi, good afternoon. It's like homecoming, you know. I've been part of General University for 8 years. Till recently, I moved on and grabbed this opportunity to be part of LSAC. I think this was very interesting for me to be part of this, because I just recently visited Law School Admission Council. The kind of academia and university interface they have, LSAC being one of the best test preps in the world, which does conduct the exam called the LSAC International. The way they have collaborated with institutions like Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, to even write test questions so that it is relevant for students who come into the profession of law itself is really interesting for me. I want to use that experience and also use the experience of working as an institution builder for General to reflect on some ideas which could be relevant for the audience today. I have based my presentations on the following heads. I would first talk whether there is a need for such interface. My second submission would be there have been very significant studies which have been taken place on this subject. I would just give you some studies which could be some reference points for all of us. Some examples of what is happening in India. In India, it has always been a significant challenge, so it is very important to reflect what kind of experience we are having as far as industry and academic interface is concerned. There is a very interesting study which I came across, which is Fowler, 1984, published a very important study as to what are the impediments in the industry-academic interaction. I want to identify the two most important impediments and probably leave the rest for Q&A. And lastly, I also want to talk about the present situation we are in because of the lack of a strong linkages between academia and universities or academia and industry. So this is the way I will go ahead and make my submission. First point, whether there is a need for such an interface. I have been teaching intellectual property rights, law and economics, competition law. One of my favorite cases or studies has been I don't know how many of you know. Rather than speaking, I just thought I would make it interactive. Does anybody know which is the first copyright law of the world? Anybody? Okay, it is called the Statute of Hannah. The Statute of Hannah is in 1710, and it's a very, very, very interesting law. If somebody wants to look into Statute of Hannah to reflect how the statute came into formulation, it beautifully gives you a story of industry and academic interface. The Statute of Hannah came into existence in 1709. Prior to that, there was no copyright law, which was either protecting the publishers or authors or, in fact, the printing press. So printing press from 16th century was pushing for a strong property right, but it failed successfully. So it went to institutions and academia and asked them to formulate something which would be accepted by the queen so that they could have a law. So the universities came with the idea that rather than giving the rights to the printing press, they said that if they would go before the prince and argue for giving the rights to the authors of the work and the people who buy those work, eventually this was the idea which is coming from the universities, right? They succeeded, and there was the Statute of Hannah, which passed and which led to the huge, revolution in terms of building the printing press of the world. So, it has been consistently observed in the history and anecdotes that academia and industry interface is not only important, but it does bring out results, and it does not only just give problems to the solutions which industry is facing, but it also leads to what is called as industry revolution. Be it the patent law, in the intellectual property right, because till patent law was not there, most of the innovations were protected as secrets, and there were no access to people, and therefore there was no innovations happening around those secrets. Again, it was the idea of the institutions which led to, bringing these innovations to the public domain so that more people could create more things around, which led to eventually, passing of, the industrial revolution, be it steam engine or whatever it is. The idea is industry-academic interface is not only important for research and innovation, but it is important because it creates employment. It is important because it creates actually a revolution for any industry. Moving forward, there are some significant studies when we talk about industry-academic interface for research and innovation. The first important significant study was conducted by Nelson in the year 1986. It was followed by Jaffe in 1989, Mansfield in 1995, and the most recent study, which actually is very important, which I have read extensively, is Cohen et al. In 2002, who has extensively used the data from the Carnegie Mellon survey on industrial R&D, and it very clearly reflects and shows what happens when industry and academia interface, actually starts working. They talk about patents, they talk about informal information exchange, they talk about publications and reports, they talk about conferences, they talk about, licenses, they talk about contract research, they talk about consulting. So it does create a lot of opportunities, when such interfaces do happen. And I would really urge that many of you who are interested in doing, understanding this, do look up to the study. It is a very extensive study. I've never seen any other study as extensive as Cohen et al., which actually used the Carnegie Mellon survey. Moving forward, what is happening in India? When we look at the US corporate, it is very easy. The corporates do reach out to universities and institutions to bring innovation, while in India, corporates and industry bodies rely mostly on their own research that that the think tanks that they have created within the industry. So still there is a little amount of hesitance that is actually happening when it comes to India as far as industry and corporates, going out and asking or collaborating with universities. However, I would say that this paradigm shift is happening as we speak. There is a very interesting, I would say, platform in India which is called the Melting Pot 2020. Melting Pot 2020 is a very interesting platform which is actually, playing a major role in the transformational story and reaching the heights of innovation through industry and academic collaboration. Some of the examples which which are positively out of Melting Pot 2020 is the HDFC Bank recently announced a plan, to significantly invest money with IIT Bombay and IIT Roorkee as part of its academic industry academic partnership effort. They want to build emerging financial ideas. You should understand that in India now the banking systems are failing. We have had the debacle in terms of Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi, and recently there is a huge controversy around Channa Kochar. So there is significantly something wrong happening in the banking sector. So there is a huge push in the banking sector to go to institutions and formulate their ethical policies, to formulate a structure or mechanisms for making these banking institutions work. So that is why HDFC Bank is trying to push a lot of money to see whether what kind of new financial tech ideas that they can emerge to protect their systems. The second is the Ministry of HRD has recently increased the funding of IIT by increasing the money to 47 million they have invested in IIT, and it is basically to push the Make in India campaign, also to encourage innovation and strengthen industry academia ties. So this is another example we have when it comes to how there is a paradigm shift in India to go back to the universities and not just to think tanks which are created under the industries. The last example which I want to give is the Indian Electronic and Semiconductor Association, which is a trade body representing the Indian ESDM, has also signed an MOU with recently IIT Kharagpur to put another 100 crores for identifying new semiconductor technologies in India, right? The focus, I would say, is largely, in scientific rather than social science. But I will give you one experiment which Jindal did, in 2012, and I really want to reflect that is because, in social science, what happens is, especially in law school context, we were actually formulating a course curriculum for infrastructure law. There was a huge substantial money that was being pushed by the government sector in India on infrastructure. Unfortunately, we did not find not many law schools offering a course on infrastructure law, because everything in infrastructure is about writing infrastructure contracts. Now, what we did is, rather than we creating a course, we went to the industry leaders, that is IDFC, that is Infrastructure Development Corporation of India, and we said, why don't you set a curriculum? Why don't you formulate a course curriculum which students could take them as electives, and therefore it becomes relevant to go back and become potentially employable. So I think those are the kind of ideas which would become meaningful when we talk about industry and academic interface in terms of social science. Because I strongly feel if we start making industry formulate certain course curriculums which could be relevant to the audience or the student population, they become directly employable, right? So I think that was a learning, and I think that is something which I also wanted to mention as part of our Jindal experimentation when it comes to industry and academic interface. Let me quickly talk on impediments. The Fowler study of 1984 identified 15 important impediments when it comes to industry and academia interface. I want to spend on two important impediments. Largely, whenever such an interface is happening, there is one significant problem. Academics tend to focus basically on basic research. They want to get their research as early as possible. Whereas, industry on the other hand want to guard the results of the research as proprietary information. So there is that conflict that is emerging where professors want to publish, the industry wants to guard, right? They want to keep that information till it has not become profitable to them. So that is actually not helping for many collaborations to take place between academia and industry. The second one is academics tend to concentrate more on basic research that establishes new hypotheses or new concepts, whereas industry's primary concern is applied research. So mere research or basic research is not useful until unless that research is put to some application, and that again creates a lot of issues for industry and academic interface to actually take place. My submission would be is because of these impediments, certain important things or important points are missed, and the present situation is actually like there is not strong linkages between university and industry, and the following points could be the case. The faculty in general does not have any industrial enterprise or experience or exposure. You know, we tend to want to create research centers at the institution, but we also need to know whether the faculty who would be heading those research institutions, do they have any industrial experience or exposure? You know, if they do have, it's a tick. If they do not have, again, these collaborations will become difficult, right? Second, there is not much provisioning for continuing education in the universities. Like, for example, I have a faculty at IPR. Maybe this faculty needs some industry exposure. Can we continue to educate that faculty while that faculty is still at the university level? So I think there needs to be something like a continuing education being formulated to push the faculty to get the practical exposure and then think about collaborating with the industry, which may work better rather than not providing that education which is more practical or which is more, I would say, industrial experience oriented. The third is somehow there is a huge gap as far as the state of technology or state of art in the industry and the state of art at the education is concerned. I think this gap is also not helping for information to flow from industry to institutions and vice versa. And this is another very important point which we need to address if you really want to think about industry and academic collaboration. And also I feel that there is chronic dependence, at least in India, in Indian industries, to depend on foreign collaborations rather than capacity building of Indian universities. This is my last submission. Thank you so much for your attention. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty, for giving us a lot to think about. Final speaker for this half of the program. I invite Dr. Vijay Curry, who is with us all the way from Pune. He is Director of the International Center, Director of the Yashwantrao Chavan National Center of International Security and Defense Analysis, and Director of the Department of Ambedkar Studies at my alma mater, Pune University, now known as Savitribai Phule Pune University. Dr. Vijay Curry. Is he here? No? Okay. Well, we will see if he joins us this afternoon. But we have some time for Q&A now. I think we don't go into lunch until 1:30. So if anybody would like to ask questions, share some comments. Any questions? Our students want to say something? Yes, Colin has a question.
Okay, so the question is for those who are talking about funding in the humanities and social sciences, which includes law. And there's different perspectives around the world on the role of funding and whether you seek it. So, for example, in many American, for example, law faculties, there isn't a tradition of seeking research funding. Somehow they go along and they do it. So the Harvard professors and so on, they typically don't have a lot of funding of the nature that we're talking about. So it raises a question as to whether or not social sciences and humanities need the level of fundings that we see big tech, and science things within STEM. So it's really a question for those who are talking about funding challenges in that area. And I say that as someone who's a dean of law school, and encouraging my people to get funding, but sometimes the response is, do I really need funding? I don't need funding. But the university wants us to get the funding for the various metrics that they're trying to get. So, anyone who was...
I think Vic has a response.
itself, which is just that general encouragement and please try to do some more research. But in many universities, and mine is an example, key performance indicators are now used. And research metrics are one of those key performance indicators. So we had a Deputy Vice Chancellor of Research who felt it was reasonable to impose on all academic staff, from junior tutors through to senior professors, of achieving 6 referee publications of high quality a year as a minimal performance standard. You could offset that by getting a major research grant that would effectively cut down the number of activities that you need to undertake. The academics now, or legal academics now in my law school who are getting ahead, are those who are twinning and adopting science models, i.e. doing collaborative publications, doing collaborative research, going for those research funds in science, chemistry, genetics, etc. You're involved in human rights and social justice. Very few groups out there, apart from benevolent international NGOs who don't give money to first world country researchers, rather give it to developing country researchers in those types of fields. So it's becoming more of a driver and a distorted driver in that particular process. Unless you can find a Mr. Jindal or something, who you can decide that a rule of law or ethical conduct is something that's worth funding.
It's very much a science approach applied to social science.
Yeah.
There's a question.
Just to quickly respond, absolutely I agree with you. And I don't think I'm actually bullied on, so I see the exact same pressures that you're facing as has. But it's distorted, it's massively distorted, and we should, if we can, be fighting back against it.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. I need to recommend something because from the beginning we are talking about the globalization, internationalization, and this event is collecting the people from all over the world and from different universities to talk about the research collaboration. So why we cannot make an association to collect these efforts and to formalize these efforts, to have an association for ASEAN and India, and maybe we will extend more from different countries to facilitate the collaboration between the researchers from different countries, from different universities. This is just an individual efforts, and how can we talk about the systemize this and to make themes for research, and we will call all these countries and research centers and universities to participate and to send a recommendation for faculty members or researchers to have participation in this theme. So we have to get out of this conference, this important conference, with a recommendation to have this association or the organization for some countries, for research funding. And this is for sure will increase the research funding and fundraising for the research, because this is international collaboration, and this will give more trust for the research and for the researcher will be collaborating under the same umbrella. Thank you very much. This is my information.
Excellent suggestion. Thank you so much, Dr. Menon. There might even be some common ground here between what the Vice Chancellor suggested in his remarks this morning when he spoke at his office about the idea he had when he was at Davos, and what you have just suggested. So we will definitely make it part of our follow-up at the end of the conference.
Hi, my name is Jimmy. I'm from New York, Stony Brook University. So this morning I learned a lot from the theme about the interface between industry and academia. And before I came here, I was at a national conference in the United States, and the keynote speech was given by the provost of the Georgia Tech University. And he said that actually there are lots of jobs in the future that are not even created. So if the universities are following the industry by creating job-enhanced disciplines, then we can never catch up. So what I'm talking about is that at the university administrators, we always encourage our students to learn, to change the modes of learning. Rather than staying in the classroom, we should focus on experiential learning, and also encourage students to take advantage of of the summer semesters to go find industry so they can apply what they have learned rather than changing the university's courses or discipline into too much functional, because the basic research is the core of the mission of the university. So that is one observation. My question is that even though we talk about interface industry and academia, so we are basically looking at those that are more related to industry. What about humanities? What about language? What about culture? What about anthropology, ethnography? Are we also encouraging students to do that? And if we do that, how?
Any response? Any other questions?
Yes.
I write on the areas of culture too. My last paper actually gave me a fantastic idea, that's the reason I wanted to take this one. I wrote on internet infidelity. Internet infidelity, that's the first book ever written. Internet infidelity took a very huge impetus after the Ashley Madison leak. So we did a culture study to understand what aspects of culture is actually making people push towards these websites, and what is making them to be hanging out in these spaces. Culture is a very, very important part, right? So I think when we only go to culture to find answers for the problems and not use culture as part of the building process itself. So that is where I think there is a significant scope, to have sociology. Like for example, I extensively used Gerrit Hofstede study, cultural differences, which is not actually not taught in many law schools, right? So I think the interdisciplinarity, right, needs to be brought more into the idea of building systems. Like for example, what is actually making rich people in India take crores of rupees and not pay back, is important, because we need to know that there is something seriously happening in India, right? Like be it Vijay Mallya or be it, Nirav Modi, who have taken 13, 14, 15,000 crores and they have not wanted to repay, right? So we really want to understand these things even before the problem, there's a problem, right? So that means to say that the banking system also needs to capture this and probably build. There is a significant scope for research, and it is only as we speak, right? Sophistication in terms of academic and industry collaborations through interdisciplinary research could be the way forward. So there is a scope. I hope I responded to your question.
Thank you.
Actually, I was just about to say something very similar. Professor Mitchell, Vice Chancellor at the University of Derby, in response to your question. I think we do need to be quite clear about what a university is going to be delivering and what that partnership with industry needs to be. I think industry, strangely, particularly in the UK, challenges us, all universities, that we don't have the skills set in our graduates at the end of their degrees. But actually, if you sit with them for hours and hours and hours like I do, they actually don't know what skills they're really looking for. What they do know is that innovation isn't coming from a single disciplinary approach, and therefore what they have to look at across their organisations, but is it in our graduates? I don't know, that we need more interdisciplinary graduates that would actually lead to them being safe in a more innovative approach in their industry. So we have Rolls-Royce as our headquarters in Derby, and they've just nearly taken everybody with an engineering background in the past. Even when they've done HR or whatever, they now have started to appoint a change in terms of the number of art students they are taking into the organisation in order to give creativity back to the industry. So I think there's a piece of research that we all should be doing as universities about, to get that true creativity. We probably do need more interdisciplinary teaching in our institutions.
Yes.
Very quickly, I like what what you said. And I do, I was born and raised in China. I'm familiar with the Asian, curriculum in the university in the United States. And I would say that I would argue that in the future, probably students should not be divided into discipline to start with. Or at least they should take a broad array of courses to really enable them to find out different disciplines before they decide what to take. Or, other way around, if you are in engineering, you should be able to take humanities courses along the way. So only in this way can they be informed and also identify and search for those complementary disciplines or knowledge that will really help them to be, in the future to deal with the complexity of the issue, rather than only claim themselves as an engineer or scientist. I think those kind of things will enable the future education of a younger generation to really be positioned in a way to be driven by the program and contribute from different discipline perspectives. Thank you.
Time for a final question.
Good afternoon to everybody. I am Professor Deveti and I am from Sunni University, Himachal Pradesh in Electrical and Computer Science Engineering, as well as I am also working as Director of International Affairs for Sunni University. And I have a question. My question is a little different. First of all, I would like to thanks my thanks to OP Jindal Global University that they have invited, and especially to Mr. Bhandari who has sent the invitation to us, and that's why we are here. My question is that I need some information from the organizer or from anybody, a member here, about the ASEAN. We have checked the website and we have found that mission and vision is very excellent, and there are 30 more, in my knowledge there are more than 30 member universities. So how is the Indian universities are eligible to be a member of this ASEAN, or how we can become the member? So if anybody can provide information.
So perhaps you're referring to the ASEAN Universities Network?
Yes.
Yes, so we have been in touch with them, and they have, we've worked with them at the initial stages of planning this conference. There is an ASEAN forum and there's an ASEAN +3 forum, which consists of universities from China, Japan and Korea, in addition to the ASEAN member states. At the moment, Indian universities are not eligible to be members of this network. But that doesn't stop us from collaborating with either individual institutions from the region, from the ASEAN region, or indeed as a group, as has been suggested by some of our delegates already today. And that is what inspired us to bring everybody together today. Okay, thank you very much for... We have a student who has a question.
Hello, good morning everyone.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I had a small question about, so while I was reading about the academia and industry interface, I also came across one of the major challenges was the production and consumer collaboration. And I felt like universities aren't able to facilitate certain forums for those things, probably because of the single-minded needs or like the single-handed needs that are asked by the industries in their product making or product designing in this sense. So, I mean, there are so many academicians here who are really well run. I was just asking if anything could be done from the universities and in order to facilitate these forums, not only on the national level but international level, when they deal with sort of corporations, and how do we facilitate this problem of where a corporation only asks for a certain kind of thing where, like, and it's not a very holistic development for the students, and it becomes a very single-minded idea. So how do we deal with that as university students and as an institution which has to do with industry corporations?
You take the money or you don't. If it's too focused and it doesn't fit the research agenda, you say, no, thank you, find somebody else. Oh, sorry.
Michael Pyle, Jigme Walchuk, School of Law, Kingdom of Bhutan. The answer, and as soon as you're a student, you'll spend the rest of your academic career making these kinds of judgments as you grow more senior. You either take the money or you don't. If it's too focused, if it's too outside of your research regime, if it doesn't benefit you in any number of ways, sometimes you just say, I'm not interested. Now, hopefully that is followed up with, And by the way, rich industrial sponsor, would you be interested in something similar? It's not at all similar, but was what I was planning on doing anyway. And they return and so on and so forth. It's a negotiation like everything else in life. But sometimes you do have to let the money walk. And I say that as a vice dean in charge of funding, grant raising, foundation, alumni, and development relations. Sometimes you have to let the money walk, and it hurts. It hurts you, and it hurts your funding team. It hurts your funding team very deeply.
Thank you for the reassuring response, Michael. I just want to give a quick word to one of the students from Afghanistan who would like to say something on behalf of the group. We have Jamal Hakimi. Hassan. Just take Jamal.
Good afternoon. I would like to thanks from all of you. As you know, we are from Afghanistan, and we live in Afghanistan in a hard and dangerous situation, and we live there. So we need your helps. We need the world, the helps of all around the world. And I'm very glad to attend this particular conference and meet some of professors from different countries. We came here to learn something. We came here to bring some ideas for our nation, for our country. So we need to learn as more as, and we asking you to learn, to tell something, to teach something about important to control the situation of our country. And I would like to thank Mr. Rahul Bandari to invited us with my Afghan teams who are also studying here in India. We came here through an opportunity of ICCR, and we are studying here in India. So we are trying to get new ideas, and we are trying to know new ideas, and we are trying to bring some new ideas from you guys to our country. So I'm very glad to be with you. So thank from all of you. Thank you very much.